Imagine a creature so powerful its very existence could rewrite the laws of life and death. A single feather, rumored to heal the most grievous wound. A single tear said to grant immortality. For thousands of years, the most powerful people on earth, pharaohs, emperors, and popes, have searched for it. Not as a myth, but as a biological reality, a key to unlocking eternal life. They pored over ancient texts, dispatched expeditions into uncharted deserts, and spent fortunes trying to capture this living miracle. But there's one terrifying detail, a secret hidden in the original accounts, that they all seem to miss. The phoenix, the ultimate symbol of immortality, dies. It doesn't just get old and pass away. It builds its own funeral pyre, sings a final beautiful song, and is consumed by a fire of its own making. It is immortal, yet it chooses to face an agonizing end. And the reason why is the most unsettling part of the entire legend. Why would a creature that cannot be killed choose to die? The answer isn't about rebirth. It's about a cosmic debt, a terrible price that must be paid. And understanding that price changes everything you think you know about this legendary bird. To unravel this mystery, we can't start with the familiar image of a fiery eagle. We have to travel back, further than Rome, further than Greece, to the black soil and sun-scorched sands of ancient Egypt, nearly 5,000 years ago. Here, along the banks of the Nile, they didn't speak of a phoenix. They spoke of the Bennu. The Bennu bird was not just an animal, it was a living god, a manifestation of the soul of the most powerful deity in their pantheon, the sun god, Ra. The Egyptians believed that at the dawn of creation, there was nothing but a dark, endless ocean of chaos called Nu. Then from these primordial waters a single mound of earth arose, the first dry land in existence. And the first living thing to appear on that mound was the Bennu. It let out a cry that broke the eternal silence and set creation in motion. That cry was the first sunrise, the birth of light and life itself. The Bennu was, in their minds, the spark that started the universe. It was depicted not as a fiery eagle, but as a majestic gray heron, with a long, elegant beak and two sweeping feathers cresting its head, sometimes wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt. It was the living embodiment of the sun, of creation, and of rebirth. The very city where it was most worshipped, Heliopolis, literally means city of the sun. The Egyptians believed the Bennu lived atop a sacred pillar or a holy tree within the great temple of Ra. It wasn't just a symbol. They believed it was a real, singular creature. But the Bennu's connection to rebirth was tied directly to the Egyptian understanding of time. They saw time not as a straight line, but as a series of repeating cycles. The sun rose and set, the Nile flooded and receded, and life followed death. The Bennu was the master of these cycles. They believed it lived for a period of over 500 years, and as it grew old, it would return to its temple home in Heliopolis. There it would build a nest, not of twigs, but of the most fragrant and rare spices, frankincense, myrrh, and cinnamon. At the dawn of a new day, the sun god Ra would cast his first rays upon the nest, and it would ignite. The old Bennu would be consumed in a blaze of fragrant fire, and from the ashes a new young Bennu would emerge, ready to live out the next cycle. This wasn't just a story. For the Egyptians, it was a divine promise. A promise that just as the sun was reborn every morning, and the Bennu was reborn from its own ashes, so too could the human soul, there be reborn into the afterlife. The Bennu was the ultimate guarantee of eternity, but it was a story largely confined to the temples and sands of Egypt. For it to become a global legend, it needed a traveler, a historian, and a storyteller. Enter Herodotus, the brilliant and endlessly curious Greek historian from the 5th century BC, often called the father of history. Herodotus traveled the known world, documenting the customs, beliefs, and stories of foreign lands. When he visited Egypt, he was captivated by the tales of the Bennu bird. He listened intently to the priests of Heliopolis and recorded what he heard, but through his own Greek lens. And it was in his writings, in his famous work, The Histories, that the creature was first introduced to the Western world and given a new name. He called it the phoenix, likely from the Greek word phoenix, meaning crimson or purple red, perhaps describing the color of the flames or the bird itself. Herodotus's account is staggering in its detail. He writes, and I paraphrase, "I have not seen it myself except in paintings, for it is very rare, and only comes to Egypt, so they say, once every 500 years. He describes how the phoenix, upon the death of its father, flies from Arabia to the Temple of the Sun in Egypt. It fashions an egg out of myrrh, a precious and fragrant resin. It then hollows out the egg until it's just light enough to carry the body of its dead father. It places its father inside, seals the egg, and carries this sacred burden all the way to Heliopolis, where it lays the egg upon the altar of the sun. Notice the subtle but crucial change. In the Egyptian version, the bird dies and is reborn in its own fire. In Herodotus's first account, the son buries the father. The story is already evolving, morphing as it passes from one culture to another. The Greeks were fascinated by this tale. It resonated with their own myths of gods, heroes, and epic cycles. But they took the element of fire, which was secondary in the Egyptian tale, and made it the absolute centerpiece of the entire legend. Later Greek writers like the poet Ovid would refine the story into the version we know today. They painted a picture of a magnificent bird, the size of an eagle, with plumage of scarlet and gold, and a cry so beautiful that all other animals would fall silent to listen. They described its nest of cinnamon and spikenard, how it would face the rising sun, and allow the solar fire to consume it completely. And then from the smoldering ashes, a tiny worm would appear, which would grow, feather by feather, into the new phoenix. The cycle of self-immolation and resurrection was now complete. The phoenix was no longer just a symbol of the sun's daily return. It was now the ultimate emblem of overcoming death itself. This powerful new version of the myth was a perfect fit for the next great superpower rising in the Mediterranean, Rome. The Romans were masters of propaganda, of using symbols to project power, and they saw in the phoenix the perfect metaphor for their own empire. Rome was the eternal city. The Roman Empire was meant to last forever. What better symbol than a creature that could not die, that was perpetually reborn, stronger than before? The phoenix became an imperial icon. The Emperor Trajan minted coins with the phoenix on the back, with the inscription "the happiness of the age," tying the bird's renewal to his own successful rule. The Emperor Hadrian did the same, using the phoenix to symbolize the eternal regeneration of the empire. It appeared in Roman art, in their poetry, and in their politics. The phoenix was a promise to the Roman people, and a warning to their enemies. Rome cannot be destroyed. It will always rise from the ashes. From a sacred Egyptian heron to a Greek mythological marvel to a piece of Roman imperial propaganda, the phoenix had completed its first great journey. It had become the most powerful symbol of rebirth and immortality in the ancient world. But all of this, the Egyptian soul, the Greek fire, the Roman coin, is only the public story. It's the legend everyone knows. It still doesn't explain the central, terrifying mystery. It doesn't tell us why an immortal being would build its own funeral pyre and choose to burn. The answer to that question lies in a much darker, more mystical interpretation of the myth, one that suggests the phoenix's fire isn't just for rebirth, it's for purification. A cleansing of something so terrible, it must be burned out of existence at the end of every age. What could be so foul, so corrupt, that a divine creature must incinerate itself to erase it? This isn't about personal sin or a simple reset button. This is about cosmic hygiene. To understand this, we have to travel back, past the Romans, past the Greeks, to the silty banks of the Nile, under the watchful eyes of the gods of Egypt. This is where the story truly begins, not with the phoenix, but with a bird called the Bennu. The Bennu was a creature of breathtaking beauty, often depicted as a gray heron with a long, elegant crest of 2 feathers. It was said to have been born from the heart of the sun god, Ra. In fact, the ancient Egyptians believed the Bennu bird was the Ba, the very soul, of Ra himself walking the earth. It wasn't just a symbol of the sun, it was a living fragment of its divine power. Its home was Heliopolis, the city of the sun, where it lived perched atop the Benben stone, the primordial mound that first rose from the dark, watery chaos of creation. The name Bennu itself is thought to be derived from the Egyptian word weben, which means to rise or to shine. Every morning, as the first rays of light broke the horizon, the cry of the Bennu bird was the sound that heralded the new day. It was the sound that declared victory over the darkness of night. And in the Egyptian worldview, the night was not merely an absence of light. It was a tangible, monstrous entity. Every single evening, as Ra's solar barge descended into the underworld, the Duat, it faced its eternal nemesis, Apep, the serpent of chaos. Apep was a colossal snake, an embodiment of Isfet, the Egyptian concept of chaos, injustice, and cosmic decay. He wasn't just a monster to be slain, He was the antithesis of creation itself. His goal was to swallow the sun, to unmake the world and return everything to the lifeless, primordial darkness from which it came. The battle between Ra and Apep was waged every night, for all eternity. And every morning Ra's triumphant return, his glorious rebirth at dawn, was proof that order, or Ma'at, had once again conquered chaos. The Bennu bird, the soul of Ra on earth, was the living embodiment of that daily victory. Its cry was not just a welcome to the sun. It was a roar of defiance against the forces that sought to extinguish it. Now, imagine this cycle repeating not just daily but over a vast expanse of time. 1,000 years. Think of the slow, creeping accumulation of chaos, of darkness, of Isfet, that seeps into the world over a millennium. Every lie, every act of cruelty, every betrayal. It doesn't just disappear. In the ancient Egyptian mind, it fed Apep. It strengthened the serpent. It was a slow poison, weakening the foundations of Ma'at, of cosmic order. After 1,000 years, the world would be groaning under the weight of this accumulated darkness. The soul of the sun god, the Bennu, would feel this corruption most acutely. It was a living barometer of the world's spiritual health. And when the sickness became too great, when chaos threatened to overwhelm creation, the bird knew its time had come. This is where the fire comes in. The Bennu's pyre wasn't an act of suicide prompted by old age. It was a necessary divine sacrifice, a cosmic cauterization. The bird would fly to the farthest reaches of the known world, gathering the most fragrant and potent spices: frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, spikenard. These weren't just for aroma. They were sacred purifying agents. It would build its nest not as a cradle for new life, but as an altar, a crucible. And when the moment was right, it would sing a song so beautiful, so heartbreakingly pure, that even the sun god Ra would pause his journey across the sky to listen. This song was a eulogy for the age that was passing, a final perfect expression of Ma'at before the cleansing. Then the sun's rays would ignite the nest. The resulting fire was no ordinary flame. It was a vortex of divine energy, a holy inferno. And in that fire, the Bennu didn't just die. It took upon itself the accumulated chaos, the spiritual filth, the Isfet of the entire millennium. It became a vessel for all the world's darkness. And as its body was consumed, so too was that darkness annihilated. It was burned out of existence, reduced to nothing but purified ash. This is the terrible purification the myth speaks of. The phoenix doesn't just die to be reborn. It dies to save the world from itself. It is the ultimate reset, not for the bird but for creation. And from those sterile, sanctified ashes, a new Bennu would emerge, young, pure, and perfect. It was the physical manifestation of a new dawn, a new age free from the corruption of the past. Its first act was always the same: to gather the ashes of its former self, encase them in an egg of myrrh, and carry them back to the temple at Heliopolis, placing them upon the altar of the sun. It was an offering, a testament, a promise. Order has been restored. The cycle begins anew. This Egyptian origin story is profoundly different from the one most of us know. It's not a gentle story of renewal. It is a violent, cosmic war fought by a divine soldier in the form of a bird. The fire isn't a magical trick. It's a weapon of mass purification. The phoenix is not just a symbol of immortality. It is the guardian of reality, the fail-safe of creation against the encroaching void. But as this powerful, terrifying story traveled out of Egypt, something strange happened. It was picked up by Greek historians like Herodotus, and later, by Roman writers like Ovid and Pliny the Elder. And as they retold the tale, they began to change it. They kept the 1,000-year lifespan, the nest of spices, the fire, the rebirth from the ashes. But they left something crucial behind on the banks of the Nile. They left behind the serpent. In the Greco-Roman versions, the phoenix's great enemy disappears entirely. There is no Apep, no cosmic chaos to be fought. The bird's death is no longer a world-saving sacrifice. Instead, it becomes a natural process, a marvel of the biological world. The writers describe it with the detached curiosity of a naturalist observing a strange creature. They focus on the mechanics of its rebirth, the type of spices it uses, the specific length of its life. They strip-mined the myth for its spectacle, but left its soul behind. The question is, why? Why did they transform a story of a cosmic battle between order and chaos into a simple tale of a bird that lives a very long time? It wasn't just a misunderstanding. This change reveals a profound shift in the human understanding of the world. The Egyptians saw the universe as a fragile creation, constantly under assault from a malevolent, intelligent darkness. Their gods were warriors, and their myths were battle plans. The Greeks and Romans, particularly in their later periods, had a different view. They saw the universe as a system, governed by logic, reason, and natural laws. For them, a giant chaos serpent trying to eat the sun every night was the stuff of primitive superstition. Their world was one of philosophy, of science, of order that was inherent, not one that had to be fought for every single day. So they rationalized the phoenix. They made it a part of the natural world, albeit a miraculous part. It was no longer a divine agent, but a biological curiosity. They turned the guardian of creation into a mascot for endurance. But in doing so, they created a new kind of phoenix, a bird that would resonate through their new world for entirely different reasons. This new, secular phoenix represented something else. Not the victory of gods over monsters, but the power of resilience, the promise of Rome's eternal city, and the unconquerable spirit of the individual. They had defanged the myth, but in doing so, they made it personal. And this new personal phoenix was about to take flight and conquer the Western imagination in a way the old Bennu never could. The story was no longer about saving the world from an external darkness, but about saving ourselves from our own. The Romans were masters of appropriation. They saw something they liked, a god, a technology, a military strategy, and they didn't just copy it. They adopted it, adapted it, and made it Roman. And in the story of the phoenix, they found a symbol so potent, so perfectly aligned with their own self-image, that they would transform it into an icon of power that would echo for millennia. Their primary source was the Greeks, who had already begun the process of personalizing the Bennu. But it was a Roman poet, Ovid, who took the bare-bones story and set it on fire with imagination. Writing around the year 8 AD in his masterpiece, The Metamorphoses, Ovid paints a picture so vivid you can almost smell the smoke. He tells of a singular bird in Assyria that lives for 500 years. It doesn't eat seeds or grass, but survives on the rarest of perfumes, the gums of frankincense and the juices of amomum. When its long life is finally drawing to a close, it builds a nest in the highest branches of a palm tree. But this is no ordinary nest of twigs and leaves. The phoenix weaves together a bed of cinnamon bark, spikenard, and golden myrrh. It settles into this fragrant pyre and, amidst the sweet-smelling spices, breathes its last. And then Ovid tells us the magic happens. From the body of the dead father, a new young phoenix is born, destined to live for another 500 years. Once it is strong enough, its first sacred duty is to honor its parent. It lifts the entire nest, its own cradle and its father's tomb, and carries it through the air to the great temple of the sun in Egypt, laying it before the sacred doors. What Ovid did was revolutionary. He turned a cyclical myth into a deeply personal drama of death and legacy. He gave it sensory details, the scent of cinnamon and myrrh, the image of the high palm tree, the filial piety of the young bird. He created a narrative with a beginning, a middle, and an end, all contained within the bird itself. The phoenix was no longer just a passive herald of a cosmic cycle. It was the active protagonist of its own incredible story of sacrifice and renewal. This was a story you could feel, a myth that was becoming a legend. But if Ovid gave the phoenix its poetry, another Roman, Pliny the Elder, tried to give it a foothold in reality. Pliny was a naturalist, a collector of facts, rumors, and wonders. In his encyclopedic work, Natural History, written a few decades after Ovid, he treats the phoenix not as a myth, but as a real, if exceedingly rare, species. He meticulously records its details as if filing a field report. He describes it as the size of an eagle, with a golden sheen around its neck, a purple body, and a blue tail mixed with rose-colored feathers. It has, he says, a crest of feathers on its head. He repeats Ovid's story of the nest of spices, adding that the marrow of the dead bird's bones produces a small worm, which then grows into the new phoenix. But Pliny does something even more audacious. He claims the phoenix was actually brought to Rome. He reports that in the year 36 AD, a phoenix was captured in Egypt and transported to the capital, where it was put on public display. This, he says, was recorded in the official Roman archives, the Acts of the Senate. He even quotes a senator who supposedly saw it. Now, was this true? Almost certainly not. It was likely a case of mistaken identity. Perhaps an exotic bird like a golden pheasant being passed off as the legendary creature. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that Pliny, one of the most respected scholars of his time, presented it as fact. He moved the phoenix out of the realm of poetry and into the category of natural history. He was telling his Roman audience, this incredible creature of rebirth isn't just a story, it's real, and it has been seen here in our city. The story was so compelling that even the great historian Tacitus, known for his cynical and sober-minded approach, couldn't ignore it. Writing about the same period, Tacitus also mentions the alleged arrival of the phoenix in Egypt. He's more skeptical than Pliny, noting that the whole subject is obscure with fable, but he still dedicates a significant passage to discussing the different theories about its life cycle. The very fact that a serious historian like Tacitus felt compelled to include it shows just how deeply the phoenix myth had penetrated Roman consciousness. It had become a topic of serious debate among the intellectual elite, and from there, it was a short flight from the scholar's study to the emperor's palace. The Roman emperors understood the power of symbols better than anyone. They needed to project an image of stability, strength, and, most importantly, permanence. The Roman Empire was meant to be eternal, the imperium sine fine, the empire without end. And what better symbol for an eternal empire than an immortal bird that is reborn from its own destruction, stronger than before? The phoenix became the perfect piece of imperial propaganda. It was a living metaphor for Rome itself. Had the city not been born from the ashes of Troy? Had it not survived civil wars, devastating fires, and barbarian invasions, only to rise again more glorious each time? The phoenix assured the people that Rome, too, was indestructible. It was a promise of continuity. This wasn't just an abstract idea. They minted it into money. Starting with the Emperor Hadrian in the 2nd century AD, the phoenix began appearing on Roman coins. Picture a Roman citizen, a soldier or a merchant, holding a coin in their hand. On one side is the face of the emperor, the symbol of current power. On the other, the image of the phoenix, often with a halo of light, a symbol of eternal power. The coin itself became a message. The emperor may one day die, but Rome, like the phoenix, will live forever. The word eternitas, eternity, was often stamped right alongside it. The bird was now the official mascot for the concept of eternal Roman rule. This was the ultimate Roman adaptation. They had taken an ancient Egyptian symbol of cosmic creation and reforged it into a political tool. The Bennu's rebirth ensured that the sun would rise. The Roman phoenix's rebirth ensured that the eagle of the legions would continue to fly. It was a symbol of resilience, yes, but it was a resilience tied directly to the destiny of a single world-dominating power. The fire of the phoenix's pyre was now the fire of the Roman forge, burning away weakness and creating an empire of tempered steel. The story had become intensely personal, but on the grandest possible scale. The fate of this one bird was now intertwined with the fate of the entire known world. But empires, even those that call themselves eternal, eventually crumble. The fires that Rome believed would forever forge it anew would one day become the fires that consumed it. And as the foundations of the Roman world began to crack, a new and revolutionary faith was spreading through its streets and provinces. This new faith spoke of a different kind of eternity. It told the story of a savior who had died and was resurrected, promising everlasting life not to an empire, but to the individual soul. The early Christians were looking for ways to explain this radical, central mystery to a world steeped in pagan mythology. They needed a symbol that their audience would instantly understand. A symbol of death and rebirth, of life conquering the grave. And there it was waiting for them, stamped on the very coins in their pockets. A magnificent bird rising from a fiery death, born again to live forever. The symbol of Rome's eternal power was about to become the symbol of an eternal life Rome could never offer. The phoenix was about to be baptized. As the Roman Empire celebrated its own supposed eternity, a new story was being whispered in the alleys and catacombs of its cities. A story of a different kind of immortality, one not for an empire of stone and legions, but for the individual soul. This fledgling Christian faith faced a monumental marketing problem. How do you sell the unbelievable? How do you convince people, living under the constant threat of death and persecution, that their own demise is not an end but a doorway? Their central promise, the resurrection of the dead, was to the Roman mind utter madness. The sophisticated, logical Greeks and Romans saw the body as a prison for the soul. The goal was to escape it, not to be reunited with it after it had rotted in the ground. They needed a bridge, a symbol, something already familiar, already powerful, that could make the impossible seem not only possible but natural. And there it was, jangling on the money changer's table, carved into public monuments, the personal emblem of emperors, the phoenix. The early Christians didn't invent a new symbol. They committed an act of audacious, brilliant theft. They looked at the most potent symbol of Roman imperial power and rebirth, and they reclaimed it. The first to do so, in a way that would echo for centuries, was a man named Clement, a bishop in Rome at the very end of the 1st century. Writing to the church in Corinth, a community wrestling with doubt, Clement needed to prove the reality of Christ's resurrection. He pointed to the signs of God's power in nature, the cycle of day and night, the planting and harvesting of seeds. Then he unleashes his masterstroke. He tells them in detail the story of the phoenix. He describes the bird from Arabia, its 500-year lifespan, its nest of frankincense and myrrh, its death in a blaze of fragrant fire, and its miraculous rebirth from the ashes. And then he asks the killer question: shall we then think it to be a great and marvelous thing, if the Creator of all things shall bring about the resurrection of them that have served him in holiness, in the confidence of a good faith, when he shows us the greatness of his promise even by a bird? It was a mic drop moment in early Christian theology. Clement was using a creature from pagan mythology, a story told by Herodotus and Ovid, as evidence for the single most important event in his faith. He was telling his flock, don't just take my word for it. Look at God's creation. He's been showing you this truth all along. If he can grant this incredible power to a mere animal, what do you think he has in store for you, who are made in his image? The phoenix was no longer just a symbol of the empire's renewal. It was now Exhibit A in the case for personal bodily resurrection. It was a piece of natural theology, a divine spoiler alert hidden in plain sight. This idea was too powerful to be a one-off. A century later, the brilliant and fiery North African writer, Tertullian, picked up the argument and sharpened it into a weapon. Tertullian was a trained lawyer, and he approached the problem with the lawyer's mind. He saw the world as a courtroom, and he was ready to prosecute the case for Christianity against the pagans. His opponents mocked the idea of resurrection. They said it was unnatural, a violation of the laws of physics. Tertullian's response was pure legal genius. He essentially says, objection. You claim resurrection is unprecedented, but your own stories, your own understanding of the world say otherwise. He brings the phoenix to the witness stand. He argues that God has deliberately placed the phoenix in the world to prefigure the resurrection, to give humanity a model so they would believe the promise when it came. He writes, God, you say, has no such power. But here you have a creature that is restored to life, of its own accord, a voluntary dead thing. It makes itself a tomb, and it comes out of that tomb a new creature. He turns the pagans' own symbol against them, using it to shut down their arguments one by one. If a bird can do it, God can do it. Case closed. This wasn't just an intellectual exercise. This was a message of profound hope for a community that desperately needed it. When Christians were being arrested, tortured, and thrown to the lions, the story of the phoenix was not just a myth. It was a promise. It was a guarantee that the fires of persecution were not an end. They were a purification. Like the phoenix's pyre, they were the very thing that would lead to a new, more glorious life. And so, the symbol went viral. It began to appear where Christian hope was most needed, in the darkness of the catacombs. On the walls of these underground burial chambers, among the earliest Christian art in existence, we find the phoenix. Sometimes it has a halo of sun rays, a feature borrowed directly from its pagan depiction, but now those rays signify not the unconquered sun god, but the divine light of Christ. It's painted on tombs carved into sarcophagi, a silent testament to the belief that the body lying within was not gone forever, but merely sleeping, waiting to be reborn, just like the legendary bird. The phoenix became a visual shorthand for Christ himself. Christ died, was entombed, and rose again on the third day. The phoenix dies, is entombed in its own nest of ashes, and rises again on the third day. The parallels were so perfect, it felt like divine design. The bird's unique nature, there was only ever one phoenix alive at a time, mirrored Christ's unique position as the one and only Son of God. The fragrant spices of the phoenix's nest, myrrh and frankincense, were the very gifts the Magi brought to the infant Jesus, gifts that foreshadowed both his divinity and his burial. The phoenix became more than just an analogy for resurrection. It became a symbol for Christ's victory over death itself. In some depictions, the phoenix is shown perched on a palm branch, another ancient symbol of victory and eternal life, which the Christians had adopted to represent the triumph of martyrs. The bird of the sun god was now the bird of the Son of God. This transformation was total. The phoenix was a perfect fit for the new faith, not just because of its rebirth, but because of the way it was reborn through fire. Fire in Christian thought is a dual force. It is the fire of damnation, but it is also the fire of purification. It is the flame that tests gold, burning away the impurities to leave behind something precious and strong. For Christians facing martyrdom, the idea that the flames of the pyre were not destroying them, but refining them for their glorious rebirth, was an idea of immense power. The phoenix embodied this perfectly. It didn't just die and come back. It willingly entered the fire, was consumed by it, and emerged from it perfected, more glorious than before. It was the ultimate symbol of a soul purified through suffering, of life born from the ashes of sacrifice. The symbol that once guaranteed the endless life of an earthly empire now guaranteed the endless life of the individual soul in a heavenly one. The phoenix had been fully baptized in the waters of this new faith, and in doing so, it had given that faith one of its most enduring and powerful images. But a symbol this potent, this closely identified with Christ himself, could not remain uncomplicated. As the church grew from a persecuted sect into a global power, the lines would begin to blur. The symbol of the truth risked becoming a truth in and of itself, and the beautiful bird that had served as a bridge to faith would soon find itself at the center of a new and unexpected conflict. This conflict wasn't one of swords and shields, but of stories and souls. At its heart was a simple yet profound question: who owns a symbol? For centuries, the phoenix belonged to the world of myth, to the sun temples of Egypt and the scrolls of Greek and Roman philosophers. It was a story everyone knew, a common language of rebirth that transcended culture. But as the Christian faith grew from a persecuted sect into a movement poised to challenge the old gods, its leaders faced a monumental marketing problem. How do you explain the inexplicable? How do you sell the single most radical, unbelievable idea at the core of your faith, the resurrection of a crucified Messiah, to a world that sees it as the ultimate absurdity? You don't invent a new story. You hijack the best one they already know. The early church fathers, brilliant theologians and pragmatists, saw in the phoenix a perfect Trojan horse. It was a pre-existing framework for resurrection, a pagan prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. If people could accept that a mythical bird could rise from its own ashes, then the resurrection of the Son of God was no longer a leap of faith into the unknown, but the next logical step in a story they already accepted. The phoenix became the ultimate icebreaker, the perfect analogy. One of the very first to deploy this strategy was Clement of Rome, a leader in the church writing just a few decades after the time of Christ. In a letter to the church in Corinth, he tackles the issue of resurrection head-on. He lists examples from nature, the cycle of day and night, the sprouting of a seed, but then he unleashes his masterstroke. He speaks of a remarkable bird in the east, the one called the phoenix. He recounts the familiar tale, how it lives for 500 years, builds a nest of frankincense and myrrh, dies, and is reborn from a worm that emerges from its decaying flesh. He describes how the new bird carries the bones of its parent to the altar of the sun in Heliopolis. And then he lands the punch. He asks, shall we think it a great and marvelous thing if the Creator of the universe shall bring about the resurrection of those who have served him, when he shows us the greatness of his promise even by a bird? It was an act of pure genius. Clement wasn't just telling a nice story. He was using his audience's own cultural knowledge as evidence for his faith. He was saying, look, the proof you need is already in your own myths. God wrote a preview of the resurrection into the very fabric of creation, into the life of this incredible bird. For a pagan listener on the fence, this was an earth-shattering idea. The phoenix wasn't just a myth. It was a divine signpost pointing directly to Christ. And Clement was just the beginning. The floodgates opened. Tertullian, the fiery and brilliant Christian apologist from Carthage, wielded the phoenix like a rhetorical club. Writing in the late 2nd and early 3rd centuries, he argued against skeptics with biting logic. He pointed out the hypocrisy of a Roman world that could readily believe in the phoenix but scoffed at the resurrection of the dead. He essentially dared them, saying, The whole world believes in the story of this Arabian bird. Nature itself confirms it. If you can accept that, why is the renewal of the human body, a far nobler vessel, so unbelievable to you? Others followed, each adding their own layer to the legend. Lactantius, a Christian author and advisor to the Emperor Constantine, was so captivated by the bird that he wrote an entire, elegant Latin poem about it, De Avenu Phoenix, on the phoenix bird. In his verses, the phoenix becomes an explicitly Christian symbol, its life mirroring not just the resurrection, but the paradise of Eden, the purity of a soul untouched by sin, and the promise of eternal life. The bird was no longer just an analogy, it was being baptized, robed in the language of scripture and theology. It appeared in early Christian art, carved into the walls of catacombs, the secret burial places of the faithful. There, alongside images of fish and anchors, was the phoenix, a silent, feathered promise to those huddled in the dark that death was not the end. But there was a dangerous side to this strategy. The symbol was perhaps too perfect. The analogy was too strong. As the phoenix became more and more entangled with the doctrine of resurrection, the line between metaphor and reality began to dissolve. Did new converts believe in the resurrection because the phoenix story helped them understand it? Or were they starting to believe that the phoenix was a literal biological creature, a divine animal whose existence was physical proof of their faith? This was the unintended consequence of hijacking a myth. The myth comes along for the ride. Suddenly, Christian scholars found themselves in the awkward position of having to defend the literal existence of a mythical bird. Debates raged. Where exactly did it live? Arabia? India? What did it eat? Was it male or female or both? By adopting the phoenix, the church had inadvertently adopted the responsibility of proving it was real. The beautiful bridge to faith was starting to look like a liability. The truth of the resurrection was now tied, in the popular imagination, to the truth of a fabulous bird from the East. If one could be disproven, it cast doubt upon the other. This created a deep uneasiness among some of the church's most profound thinkers. A man like Augustine of Hippo, one of the most influential theologians in history, approached the subject with immense caution. While he acknowledged the tradition and the writings of his predecessors, he was deeply uncomfortable with grounding the central tenet of his faith in what was, essentially, a pagan fable. For Augustine, faith didn't need a bird as a crutch. The power of God and the testimony of Scripture were enough. Relying on the phoenix risked diluting the singular miracle of Christ's resurrection by suggesting it was just one example of a natural, repeatable cycle. It was a theological tightrope walk. How to use the symbol's power without being consumed by its pagan origins. The conflict deepened with the rise of alternative Christian movements, particularly the Gnostics. The Gnostics were mystics who believed salvation came through secret knowledge, or gnosis. They too seized upon the phoenix, but for them it symbolized something different. It wasn't about the simple physical resurrection of the body. For them, the phoenix represented the enlightened soul, the spirit freeing itself from the corrupt prison of the material world to be reborn into a higher, spiritual reality. They saw the bird's fiery transformation not as a promise of bodily return, but as an allegory for the alchemical process of spiritual purification. Now the mainstream church had a serious problem. Their star symbol, the poster child for the resurrection, was also the mascot for a group they considered dangerous heretics. The same bird was being used to teach two completely contradictory ideas about life, death, and salvation. This forced a reckoning. The phoenix, which had once been a unifying symbol that brought pagans to the Christian worldview, was now a divisive symbol that highlighted the fractures within Christianity itself. The bird that had been so useful in the church's infancy, when it was a struggling underdog fighting for a place in the world, was becoming a complication now that it was on the verge of victory. As the Roman Empire itself began to kneel before the cross under Emperor Constantine, the church's relationship with its pagan past had to change. It was no longer a borrower, a scrappy movement co-opting symbols out of necessity. It was becoming the dominant power, the arbiter of truth. And institutions of power have a way of cleaning house, of tidying up their origin stories and discarding the elements that no longer serve them. The phoenix, the celebrated ally, the brilliant piece of marketing, was about to find itself on the wrong side of this new theological order. Its fall from Christian grace would be as swift and decisive as its rise. The very institution it helped to build was now preparing to cast it out. and the weapon that would be used to strike the phoenix from its sacred perch was a simple, powerful idea: sola scriptura, scripture alone. In the early 16th century, a theological earthquake ripped through Europe. The Protestant Reformation, spearheaded by figures like Martin Luther, challenged the authority of the Roman Catholic Church and demanded a return to the foundational texts of Christianity. The new rallying cry was that faith, doctrine, and practice should be based only on what was written in the Bible. Anything else, traditions, papal decrees, and the vast tapestry of symbols that had been woven over centuries, was suspect. And where is the phoenix in the Bible? It isn't. Not once. For centuries, this hadn't mattered. The phoenix was a useful allegory, a beautiful metaphor inherited from the classical world and baptized into Christian thought. But in the fiery crucible of the Reformation, usefulness was no longer the standard. The standard was authenticity. The standard was biblical truth. Suddenly, the phoenix was no longer a brilliant symbol of the resurrection. It was a pagan fable, a piece of folklore, a dangerous embellishment that distracted from the pure, unvarnished Word of God. Protestant reformers, in their zeal to cleanse the church of what they saw as Roman superstition, began to tear down statues, whitewash murals, and discard relics. And with them, they discarded the symbols they deemed unholy. The phoenix, with its roots so deeply entangled in the soil of Egyptian sun worship and Roman mythology, was a prime target. It was a vestige of the old world, a beautiful lie that had no place in this new, austere vision of faith. Its story, once a source of comfort and inspiration, was now evidence of the church's deviation from the true path. It was a golden calf, a beautiful idol that had to be smashed. You might think the Catholic Church would rush to defend its adopted symbol, but the Reformation sent shockwaves in all directions. In response, the Catholic Counter-Reformation began its own period of intense self-examination. In an effort to reaffirm its doctrines and purify its practices, it too began to look critically at its own traditions. The Council of Trent, a massive assembly of church leaders, laid down new stricter rules for religious art. Art had to be clear, direct, and doctrinally sound. There was no room for ambiguity, and certainly no room for pagan creatures, no matter how well they had been assimilated. The phoenix, once a star player, was now benched. It was too exotic, its origins too murky. The risk of misinterpretation, of leading the faithful back towards pagan ideas, was simply too great. The Church, both Catholic and Protestant, was closing ranks, and the phoenix was left on the outside. But as the doors of the Church were closing, another force was rising that would challenge the phoenix in a completely different way: the dawn of reason. The Renaissance had sparked a renewed interest in the natural world. Scholars were no longer content to simply accept the stories of the ancients. They wanted to see, to touch, to dissect, and to understand. This was the age of the naturalist, the birth of what we would come to call science. Men like Conrad Gessner were compiling massive encyclopedias of the animal kingdom, seeking to catalog every living creature. And as they searched the forests of Europe, the deserts of Africa, and the newly discovered lands of the Americas, they found lions and eagles and crocodiles. But they never found a phoenix. For the first time in over 1,000 years, people began to ask a very serious question. Does this bird actually exist? Pliny the Elder had written about it as fact, but Pliny also wrote about men with the heads of dogs. The credibility of the old texts was beginning to crumble under the weight of empirical evidence. The lack of a single feather, a single bone, a single credible eyewitness account, turned the phoenix from a rare marvel into a biological impossibility. It couldn't withstand the harsh, illuminating light of the new scientific inquiry. It was relegated from the pages of natural history to the pages of mythology. A beautiful story, yes, but just a story. Cast out of the church and debunked by science, the phoenix should have died. Its symbolic power should have evaporated. But that is not the nature of the phoenix. It does not die. It transforms. It finds a new fire in which to be reborn. And as it was purged from the altars of faith and the textbooks of science, it found a new home in a world that existed in the shadows between the two, the world of alchemy. For the alchemists, the phoenix was not just a symbol, it was the symbol. It was the living embodiment of their great work, the magnum opus. Alchemy wasn't just about turning lead into gold. That was the exoteric, the literal interpretation for the uninitiated. The true goal was spiritual transformation, the purification of the soul, the turning of the base, leaden self into the incorruptible gold of enlightenment. And the process for this transformation was always described in terms of fire. The alchemist's journey began with the nigredo, the blackening, a stage of decomposition, of burning away the old self in the fires of the crucible, reducing it to black ash, to prima materia, the first matter. And what is this, if not the phoenix building its own funeral pyre? Then came the albedo, the whitening, a washing and purification of that ash. And finally, the glorious rubedo, the reddening. This was the final stage, the moment of triumph, where the purified essence was reignited, brought back to life, perfected and eternal. It was the creation of the philosopher's stone. It was rebirth. It was the phoenix rising from its own ashes, cloaked in the scarlet and gold of the rising sun. The alchemists saw their own spiritual quest in the bird's fiery cycle. The phoenix was their secret, their emblem of transmutation, a coded message that represented the ultimate mystery of creation and rebirth. And as the phoenix became the master symbol for the esoteric and the occult, it also found a powerful new role in the world of the profane, the world of politics and power. No one understood this better than Queen Elizabeth I of England. Elizabeth ascended to the throne in 1558, inheriting a kingdom torn apart by religious strife and political instability. She was a Protestant queen in a nation still reeling from the violent Catholic rule of her sister, Mary. Her own claim to the throne was considered illegitimate by half of Europe. She was a woman in a man's world, unmarried, with enemies on all sides. She needed a symbol of her rule that was powerful, unique, and distinctly non-Catholic. She chose the phoenix. It was a stroke of political genius. Elizabeth, like the phoenix, had risen from the ashes of her own near execution and imprisonment in the Tower of London. She was unique, the sole ruler of her kind, just as the phoenix was one of a kind. The motto she adopted alongside the phoenix emblem was Semper Idem, always the same, a declaration of her constancy and England's enduring strength under her rule. The phoenix represented the rebirth of England itself into a golden age of exploration and culture. It was a symbol of her virginity, her singular nature, and her political immortality. By stamping the phoenix on her coins, her portraits, and her royal insignia, Elizabeth took this ancient myth and weaponized it. She transformed it into a personal brand, a declaration of resilience and divine right that was completely independent of the Pope or any other religious authority. She became the Phoenix Queen, and in doing so ensured the bird's survival not as a religious icon, but as the ultimate symbol of secular power and unbreakable spirit. The bird had been exiled from the heavens of theology, only to be reborn in the furnaces of the alchemist and on the thrones of kings and queens. It had shed its sacred skin and emerged with a new secular power that was, in its own way, just as potent. It was no longer just a metaphor for Christ's resurrection. It was now a symbol for the resilience of the human soul, the ambition of the human mind, and the enduring power of the human state. The phoenix had found a new world, a world of secrets, science, and sovereignty. But its most dramatic transformation was yet to come, as it prepared to fly into an age of revolution, an age that would set the entire world on fire. The human state. The phoenix had found a new world, a world of secrets, science, and sovereignty. But its most dramatic transformation was yet to come, as it prepared to fly into an age of revolution, an age that would set the entire world on fire. And so it did. The year is 1776. The air across 13 colonies crackles with the scent of gunpowder and the electric charge of a radical idea: that a nation could govern itself, that it could die to a king and be reborn as a republic. Old orders were being torn down, cities were set ablaze, and from the smoking ruins of British rule, a new country was struggling to be born. In this crucible of fire and rebellion, America needed a symbol. It needed a story to tell itself, a myth to rally around. It needed a creature that understood destruction not as an end, but as a violent, necessary beginning. It needed the phoenix. The men who forged this new nation, Jefferson, Franklin, Adams, were children of the Enlightenment. They were steeped in classical history, in the tales of Rome and Greece, and they were, many of them, members of a secret brotherhood that revered ancient symbols of wisdom and rebirth, the Freemasons. Within the protected walls of their lodges, the phoenix was not just a story. It was a central allegory for the path of enlightenment. The initiate, like the bird, must pass through a symbolic death of his old, ignorant self to be raised, reborn, into the light of knowledge. For these men, creating a new nation was the ultimate act of this Masonic principle, writ large upon the world stage. They weren't just building a country, they were raising a new form of humanity from the ashes of monarchy. This is why, when the time came to create the Great Seal of the United States, the ultimate emblem of this new sovereignty, the debate was so intense. This symbol would be America's soul, stamped in wax and printed on currency for all the world to see. Benjamin Franklin, ever the pragmatist, famously argued for the wild turkey. A respectable bird, he said, and a true native of America. But others knew that this moment required more than just native respectability. It required a legend. Look closely at the earliest designs and engravings of the Great Seal. Look at the bird at its center. We call it a bald eagle today, but in many early versions the depiction is ambiguous. The bird has a tufted crest of feathers on its head, a long slender neck, and a chest puffed out with an almost defiant pride. To many observers at the time, and to historians now, it looked less like an eagle and more like a phoenix, rising from a circle of fire-like glory. Was this a deliberate secret? A nod to the initiated, hiding the esoteric symbol of rebirth in plain sight, disguised as a more conventional bird of power? The eagle, after all, was the symbol of Rome, the very empire whose fall and legacy haunted the founders. The phoenix, however, was a symbol of something greater. A republic that could perpetually renew itself. A nation that would not fall into the same decay as the empires of old. It was a promise of immortality. Every time the nation would face destruction, it would rise again, stronger, purified by the flames. The symbol on the dollar bill in your pocket may not just be an eagle. It may be the ghost of the phoenix, a permanent, hidden reminder of the nation's founding fire. This symbolism wasn't confined to secret committees. It bled out into the culture of the new republic. The phoenix became a popular name for everything from insurance companies, promising to help you rebuild from the ashes of disaster, to newspapers and towns. It was a potent, easily understood metaphor for the American spirit of resilience. When a fire devastated a colonial city, its citizens wouldn't speak of ruin. They would speak of a phoenix-like resurrection. The myth was no longer a story from a dusty Roman text. It was the lived experience of a people constantly rebuilding, pushing westward, and forging a nation from scratch. But the phoenix's most profound and painful American rebirth was yet to come. Fast forward less than a century, the nation born in revolutionary fire was now consuming itself in the inferno of civil war. Brother fought against brother, and the promise of a perpetual republic seemed destined to fail. The fires of 1776 were a crucible. The fires of the 1860s were an apocalypse. And at the heart of that apocalypse was the city of Atlanta. In 1864, under General Sherman's infamous March to the Sea, the city was systematically captured and burned to the ground. It was a strategic act of total war, designed to break the will of the Confederacy. Over 90% of the city was reduced to what was called a wilderness of ruins. Chimneys stood like tombstones over the ashes of homes and businesses. It was the absolute image of annihilation. But then, something incredible happened. From those very ashes, a new city began to rise. Almost immediately, its citizens returned, clearing the rubble, laying new foundations, and rebuilding with a speed and determination that stunned the nation. They didn't just rebuild the old Atlanta. They built a new one, a hub for a new South that was trying to emerge from the wreckage of its past. In 1888, the city officially adopted a new symbol for its seal, a symbol to capture this unbelievable story of destruction and renewal. They chose the phoenix. The seal depicts the bird rising from a pyre, with the Latin motto Resurgens, rising again. This wasn't an abstract, classical reference. For the people of Atlanta, the phoenix was real. It was their own story. They had lived through the fire. They had seen their world burn. And they had personally participated in its rebirth. The myth became a civic identity, a testament to their own endurance. Today, the phoenix is everywhere in Atlanta, on police cars, on government buildings, in the names of businesses and newspapers. It is arguably the most powerful and literal application of the phoenix myth in modern history, a constant reminder that even from total devastation, a new beginning is possible. From the secret philosophy of the Founding Fathers to the public emblem of a city reborn, the phoenix had become intrinsically woven into the American tapestry. It was the symbol of revolution, the promise of resilience, the spirit of the frontier. It represented the nation's highest ideal, the ability to reinvent itself, to burn down its old sins and outdated structures, and emerge from the flames renewed. But this powerful idea that fire can purify and create is a dangerous one. It can be a force for liberation, but it can also be a tool for tyranny. As America entered the 20th century, a century of world wars, industrial slaughter, and ideologies that promised to build new worlds through mass destruction, the Phoenix was about to be claimed by new masters. The bird of hope was about to be conscripted into armies and twisted into a symbol for regimes that saw fire not as a tool of renewal for the people, but as a weapon of purification against them. The flames were about to grow darker and far, far hotter. The first empire to truly seize the Phoenix and brand it as its own was, unsurprisingly, Rome. The Romans were masters of propaganda, of absorbing and repurposing the myths of the cultures they conquered. They saw in the Phoenix the perfect symbol not for a person's soul, but for the soul of the state. For Rome, the Phoenix was the ultimate emblem of permanence, the eternal city. Emperors began stamping the bird onto their coins, the most potent form of mass media in the ancient world. A coin passes through thousands of hands, from the richest senator to the humblest legionary. And on that coin, the image of the Phoenix alongside the emperor's face sent a clear, powerful message. This reign, this dynasty, this empire is immortal. When the Emperor Trajan celebrated his 100th anniversary of Rome's founding, the Phoenix was there on the currency, a promise of centuries more to come. When Hadrian sought to symbolize a new golden age, a rebirth of Roman glory, he minted coins with the Phoenix perched atop a globe. The message was unmistakable. The entire world was the Phoenix's nest, and Rome was the undying bird. This wasn't the gentle, cyclical rebirth of the Egyptians or the Greeks. This was a political statement, a threat. It declared that Rome could withstand any crisis, survive any war, outlast any enemy. It would burn in the fires of conflict and civil strife, only to emerge stronger, renewed, and ready to rule for another 1,000 years. The bird's beautiful song was replaced by the clatter of imperial coinage, its sacred tears now underwriting the stability of the imperial treasury. The Phoenix had been conscripted. It was no longer a symbol of natural cycles, but of manufactured state-enforced eternity. This act of political appropriation created a dangerous blueprint. It demonstrated how a myth of hope could be forged into a tool of power. And as the centuries turned and the Roman Empire itself became ash, that blueprint lay dormant, waiting for new architects of power to find it. They would find it in the smoldering ruins of the First World War. In the early 20th century, Europe was a continent of ashes. Empires had crumbled, a generation of young men was lost, and nations like Germany were left humiliated, broken, and economically crippled by the Treaty of Versailles. It was in this fertile ground of despair that the darkest perversion of the Phoenix myth would take root. The rising Nazi Party in Germany built its entire ideology on a phoenix-like narrative. They didn't need to put the bird on their flags. They wove its story into the very fabric of their national identity. They told the German people that they were a great nation laid low, burned to the ground by foreign enemies and internal traitors. But from these ashes, a new Germany, a Third Reich, would rise. It would be purified by fire, stronger, more powerful, and destined to last 1,000 years. This was the ultimate corruption of the symbol. The fire of the Phoenix was no longer a natural process of self-renewal. It was the fire of ideological purification. The ashes from which they promised to rise were not the remnants of a life well lived, but the ashes of democracy, of intellectual freedom, of anyone deemed impure or un-German. The flames were the book burnings in Berlin, the Kristallnacht pogroms, and ultimately the crematory of the concentration camps. They had taken a symbol of universal rebirth and twisted it into a justification for racial supremacy and genocide. The Phoenix's promise of a new life became a promise of a new world order, built upon the destruction of others. It was a terrifying testament to how easily the language of hope can be hijacked by the mouthpieces of hate. The bird of immortality was used to sanctify an empire of death. And this weaponization of myth wasn't confined to Germany. Across the world, states and militaries recognized the power of this symbol of resilience and rebirth from destruction. Look at the insignia for the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, America's precursor to the CIA, formed during World War II. At its heart was a phoenix rising from the flames. It symbolized the birth of a new kind of intelligence agency, one born from the crucible of global war, ready to engage in the shadowy arts of espionage and covert operations. The message was one of American resolve. From the ashes of Pearl Harbor, a new unseen power has emerged. Even in the aftermath of that same war, the symbol was claimed by the victims of state-sponsored fire. The English city of Coventry, bombed so relentlessly by the German Luftwaffe that a new term, Covent-rated, was coined to describe total destruction, adopted the phoenix as its symbol. As they rebuilt their city and their magnificent cathedral from the rubble, the phoenix became their emblem of defiance and resurrection. It was a declaration that even in the face of annihilation, the human spirit could rebuild, that life could rise again from the ruins. But here the meaning had subtly shifted once more. It was no longer just about eternity or ideological purity. It was about survival. It was about the grim, gritty human business of clearing rubble, laying new bricks, and stubbornly choosing to live on when an enemy power had tried to wipe you from the earth. The phoenix here is not a divine, magical creature, but a metaphor for the sheer willpower of a community refusing to die. From the coins of Roman emperors to the propaganda of fascist regimes and the logos of secret agencies, the phoenix had been on a dark journey. It had been forced to serve empires, to justify wars, and to underwrite the power of the state. Its brilliant plumage had been tarnished by the soot of political ambition, its song of renewal used to drown out the cries of the oppressed. The myth had been nationalized, militarized, and stripped of its universal spirituality. It seemed as if the bird belonged to the powerful now, an emblem to be stamped on official documents and flown over military bases. The state had claimed the phoenix. Empires had branded it onto their coins and their flags. But a symbol this powerful can never truly be owned. While governments tried to cage the bird of fire in their halls of power, it was already escaping, finding new life not in the ashes of nations, but in the hearts of individuals. The phoenix was about to go mainstream, in a way no emperor could have ever imagined. The printing press became the wind beneath the phoenix's wings, carrying its story from dusty monastic libraries into the workshops of thinkers, artists, and mystics. It was in the strange, smoke-filled laboratories of the alchemists that the phoenix found its next great transformation. To them, the bird was not just a story. It was a living diagram of the entire universe and the key to its secrets. They called their ultimate goal the magnum opus, the great work, the process of creating the philosopher's stone, a substance set to turn lead into gold and grant eternal life. And the phoenix was its perfect mascot. The alchemical process was one of stages, of violent destruction and glorious purification. It began with nigredo, the blackening, a stage of putrefaction, where the base materials were broken down, dissolved, and reduced to their chaotic first matter. This was the phoenix building its own funeral pyre, the moment of surrender to the flame. Then came albedo, the whitening. After the fire, the ashes were washed and purified, creating a new pure substance. This was the phoenix chick, emerging pristine and perfect from the cinders of its former self. Finally came rubedo, the reddening, the culmination of the work, where the purified matter was infused with spirit, achieving its final perfected form, the brilliant crimson gold philosopher's stone. This was the adult phoenix blazing in its full glory, a symbol not just of rebirth, but of ultimate spiritual perfection. For the alchemist, turning lead into gold was merely a metaphor for the real work, turning the unenlightened, mortal soul into an immortal, enlightened one. The phoenix was the map for a journey taken not across deserts, but within the human spirit. This deeply personal, transformative meaning began to bleed into the high culture of the Renaissance. And no one captured its new, complex soul better than William Shakespeare. In his cryptic and beautiful poem, The Phoenix and the Turtle, the bird is no longer an emblem of empire. It's a symbol of something far more intimate and tragic. The poem describes a funeral for two legendary lovers, the phoenix, a symbol of unique perfection, and the turtle dove, a symbol of unwavering faithfulness. Their love was so absolute, so perfect, that they became one being. So they loved, as love in twain had the essence but in one, two distincts, division none number therein love was slain. In their death, the very concepts of truth and beauty die with them. Shakespeare took the myth of the singular, self-renewing bird and used it to explore the ultimate union of two souls, and the profound emptiness left when such a perfect love vanishes from the world. The phoenix was no longer just about immortality. It was about a love so powerful it transcended identity itself. As the age of reason dawned, logic and science began to push mythology into the shadows. But the phoenix did not die. It simply went underground, finding refuge in the secret rituals and symbolic language of esoteric societies. Groups like the Freemasons, who drew their symbolism from ancient architecture, philosophy, and myth, saw in the phoenix the perfect emblem for their own great work, the building of a better man. For a Mason, the initiation process was a symbolic death and rebirth. The candidate, representing the rough, unworked stone or the profane man, must first symbolically die to his old life of ignorance. Then, through ritual and the learning of sacred knowledge, he is reborn as an enlightened brother, a perfect ashlar fit to be placed in the great temple of humanity. The phoenix, rising from the ashes of its old self, became a core Masonic symbol of this journey, a constant reminder of regeneration, of the eternal quest for light, and of the immortal nature of the soul. The symbol of the empire had become the secret handshake of the individual seeker, and it was this spirit of radical self-transformation that crossed the Atlantic, carried in the hearts of revolutionaries dreaming of a new world. As the 13 colonies caught fire in their fight for independence, the myth of a nation rising from the ashes of British tyranny was an irresistible narrative. While the bald eagle would ultimately be chosen as the national bird, the phoenix was a powerful contender, and its spirit is woven deep into the fabric of America's founding. Early designs for the Great Seal of the United States featured a phoenix, a clear statement that this new nation was a rebirth of democratic ideals, rising from the pyre of monarchy. Even today, some argue that the eagle on the Great Seal, with its upward-gazing head and spread wings, was intentionally designed to evoke the image of a phoenix, a perpetual symbol of the nation's ability to renew itself after any crisis. This idea became America's unofficial motto. When a city burned, it was rebuilt and called a Phoenix City. Atlanta, rising from the devastation of the Civil War, embraced the symbol. San Francisco, after the catastrophic 1906 earthquake and fire leveled the city, adopted the phoenix as its official emblem, printing it on flags and city documents. The bird became a part of the American psyche, a symbol of grit, resilience, and the unwavering belief that no matter how devastating the fire, we can always and will always rebuild. But the final and perhaps greatest transformation was yet to come. In the 20th and 21st centuries, the phoenix flew out of the pages of esoteric books and off of government seals, directly into the heart of global pop culture. It was here that it would become more famous and more personal than ever before. For millions, their definitive introduction to the myth came from a children's book about a boy wizard. Fawkes, the phoenix belonging to Albus Dumbledore in the Harry Potter series, perfectly embodied the creature's most noble traits. He was fiercely loyal, a symbol of unwavering hope in the darkest of times. His tears had the power to heal any wound, a literal representation of redemption and recovery. And of course, he repeatedly died in bursts of flame only to be reborn from the ashes, teaching a generation of children that endings are not always endings, but often the start of a new beginning. Fawkes made the phoenix a friend, a guardian, a symbol of the light that never truly goes out. At the same time, another story was exploring the myth's darker, more terrifying side. In the world of the X-Men, the phoenix was not a bird, but a cosmic force of unimaginable power, the nexus of all psionic energy in the universe. When it merges with the telepath Jean Grey, it grants her godlike abilities, but at a terrible cost. The Phoenix Force represents life, creation, and passion, but its power is so absolute that it constantly threatens to become a force of total destruction, the Dark Phoenix. Jean Grey's story is a constant, brutal cycle of death and rebirth, as she struggles to control the cosmic fire within her. This interpretation internalized the myth completely. The pyre wasn't a nest of twigs and spice. It was the human soul itself, capable of both creating new worlds and burning existing ones to the ground. It was a powerful metaphor for the fire within all of us, our potential, our rage, our passion, and the lifelong struggle to master it before it consumes us. From a cosmic bird in the Egyptian sun, to the emblem of Roman emperors, to the alchemist's secret key, to the spirit of a new nation, the phoenix has completed its long migration. Today, its image is etched not just in stone and on paper, but onto human skin. The phoenix tattoo has become one of the most popular and powerful symbols in the world. It is a personal declaration, a badge of honor worn by those who have walked through fire. It speaks of surviving addiction, overcoming abuse, enduring profound loss, or clawing one's way back from rock bottom. Each tattoo is a story, a personal myth that says, "You see these ashes? They were my life. I was burned down, I was destroyed, I was nothing. But I did not die. I rose, and the fire did not defeat me. It forged me. The symbol no longer belongs to the sun, or to an emperor, or even to a nation. It belongs to anyone who has ever had to find the strength to begin again. It's a story whispered in the heart of the addict who hits rock bottom and finds sobriety. It's the anthem of the entrepreneur whose first company collapses, only for them to build an empire from the rubble of their failure. It's the quiet resolve of anyone who has survived heartbreak, grief, or profound loss, and had to painstakingly reassemble their world piece by piece, not as it was but as it now must be. The phoenix is the ultimate symbol of what psychologists today call post-traumatic growth. It's the radical idea that the most profound human development doesn't happen in times of comfort and ease. It happens in the aftermath of crisis. It's the discovery that the trauma that was meant to destroy you can, if you let it, become the very thing that makes you stronger, more compassionate, and more profoundly alive than you ever were before. The fire doesn't just reveal your strength, it creates it. This is why the symbol has never faded. It's too true to our experience. We see its echo in our most beloved modern stories. Think of Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix in Harry Potter. He is not just a magical creature. He is a symbol of loyalty, healing, and hope. His tears have the power to heal mortal wounds, and when he dies, he is reborn from his own ashes, a constant, beautiful reminder that even in the face of Lord Voldemort, in the face of absolute evil and death, hope is cyclical. It always returns. Think of Jean Grey from the X-Men, who merges with the cosmic Phoenix Force. She becomes a being of unimaginable power, capable of both creation and destruction on a galactic scale. Her story is a dramatic, superpowered exploration of our own inner potential for radical transformation. The terrifying and awesome power that lies dormant within us, often unlocked by crisis. These stories aren't just entertainment. They are tapping into a deep, archetypal truth that we recognize in our own bones. The Phoenix archetype teaches us a fundamental lesson about the nature of reality itself. Creation requires destruction. You cannot build a new city without first clearing the old, dilapidated structures. You cannot plant a new forest until the old, dead undergrowth has been cleared, often by the cleansing power of a wildfire, which returns vital nutrients to the soil. In our own lives, you cannot become the next version of yourself without letting the old version die. And that is the hardest part. We cling to what is familiar, even when it's hurting us. We stay in the dead-end job, the toxic relationship, the self-destructive habits, because the thought of the alternative, the fire, the unknown, the void, is terrifying. We are afraid of the ashes. But the myth of the phoenix reframes this entire process. It tells us that the fire is not the enemy. The fire is the agent of change. The ashes are not a sign of defeat. They are proof that you survived. They are the fertile ground from which your new life will grow. So, how do we become the phoenix? The myth isn't just a story. It's a blueprint. First, it requires an honest inventory. The phoenix doesn't just randomly burst into flame. It knows its time has come. It recognizes that its current form has reached its limit. We, too, must have the courage to look at our lives and ask, what is no longer serving me? What belief, what habit, what relationship has run its course and is now holding me back? This isn't about blaming ourselves. It's about recognizing seasons. It's about honoring what was, but accepting that its season is over. Second, it requires a conscious surrender. The phoenix builds its own pyre, chooses the moment. It doesn't fight the flames, it embraces them. This is the act of letting go. It's the terrifying, liberating decision to stop resisting the inevitable. It's the moment you quit the job, end the relationship, or finally confront the addiction. It is an act of profound faith. Faith that on the other side of this ending, there is a new beginning waiting. It's the understanding that you must release your grip on what you are to make space for what you could become. And third, it requires the gathering of spices. Remember the myrrh, the spikenard, the cinnamon? These weren't random. They were the most precious, fragrant, and valuable things the bird could find. When we face our own fires, we must do the same. We must gather our strengths, our wisdom, our most cherished memories, the lessons from our past. These are the things that will survive the fire. Your pain, your fear, your ego, those will burn. But your resilience, your love, your core essence, that is the aromatic fuel for your own rebirth. You don't rise from the ashes as a blank slate. You rise as a distillation of the best parts of who you were. purified and strengthened by the ordeal. This isn't a one-time event. It's a cycle. Life will continually ask us to let go and begin again. We will have many pyres and many rebirths. Each time we do it, we learn to fear the fire a little less and to trust the process a little more. We learn that endings are not failures, they are graduations. The phoenix, then, is the ultimate symbol of hope. Not a passive, gentle hope that things might get better on their own, but an active, fierce, and defiant hope. It's the hope that is forged in the heart of despair. It's the belief that your current circumstances are not your final destination. It is the promise that no matter how completely you are brought to your knees, no matter how scattered your ashes may seem, within you lies an inextinguishable spark, the power to gather yourself, to reform, and to rise. Not just to rise, but to rise renewed, with brighter feathers, a stronger song, and a wisdom that can only be earned in the flames. Look around you. The world is constantly burning and being reborn. Societies collapse and new ones are built. Ideas are debunked and new paradigms emerge. Nature itself operates on this relentless, beautiful cycle of death and rebirth. And you are a part of that. You are not separate from it. That same elemental force that sets stars ablaze and pushes green shoots through scorched earth lives in you. So what is your fire? What part of your life is calling for transformation? What old self needs to be honored and then released so that a new self can be born? Do not be afraid of the ending. The Phoenix teaches us that the end is the most sacred part of the journey. It is the moment just before the miracle. It is the holy ground where you leave behind everything that weighed you down, and you prepare to fly. The myth of the Phoenix is not about a magical bird that lived thousands of years ago. It's about the magical potential that lives inside you, right now. It is the story of your own resilience, the story of your own immortality, the story of your power to look at the ruins of your past, and from the ashes build a future that soars.